I'm going to welcome us back here, everybody. This is Jeff, and I'm here with Kees. Hello, Kees.
Hello. We're rising from, well, I wouldn't quite say the dead, but from a long hiatus.
Slumber.
Yeah,
Slumber. Yeah. Welcome to another installment of Eclectrocasts. We just finished listening to the track Bring the Suspect by Pete Prescription, who happens to be our guest this time around in Eclectrocasts. Hello, Pete. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, I'm good.
Good.
Hey, welcome. Nice to meet you, and nice to have you on our podcast.
Well, likewise.
Wonderful.
It's great.
Yes. And it's funny because it's taken us so long to get around to talk to you, though we've interacted on Twitter for a long time, and we've known about you for years through various label mates of yours at Ramada, etc. And so we're really happy to have you on.
Well, it's great to be asked.
Yeah, excellent.
Great.
So, Pete, before we begin talking about your music and especially that track we just heard, Bring the Suspect, can you tell us a little bit about where people can find your music?
Yes, well, mainly it's on the Bandcamp site, the sadly now defunct Ramada. That's where the bulk of it is. That's certainly where all the released material is. So I think it's still going to be, the Bandcamp site for Ramada is still going to be active for a while. I don't know for how long, but yeah, that's where the stuff that I've released is, and it's the stuff that I'm happiest with, actually. I've also got a SoundCloud account, which that tends to be, the equivalent of things which fell down the back of the settee, which I post up on there now, so there's a few odds and ends, and I've underused it for a while, with the focus being on Ramada and on the releases there, so it may be, given that Ramada's now finished, that I might start posting some more things up there. But yeah, on SoundCloud, it is just Pete Prescription, so it shouldn't be difficult to find.
There's some interesting things on there that are like 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different kind of work, but I found it interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a common thread, but I suppose it's like anything. The more you carry on with something in earnest, the more developed, maybe refined in some respects. I mean, I don't think of my work as refined in a lot of ways, but you build on certain things that you've done, and so hopefully there's some progression and development there. But yeah, occasionally I'll still listen back to that stuff and think, yeah, there was something going on there.
Yeah, it's kind of harnessing that combination between spontaneity and thought, behind it, taking care to actually package it and present it in a certain way, but not lose that initial spark that kind of made you excited about the idea.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think there's always, you've mentioned two opposing elements, about, thought and spontaneity, and I think there is always that oppositional kind of stuff going on, and I think that's where the tension is in a way, hopefully.
Yeah, and knowing when to leave it alone.
Yes.
Knowing when, just you've done it and that's it. You can't really better it, or, messing with it too much will ruin. We all go through that, though, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the opening track that we listened to. One of the things that really stands out in your music is you seem to be very attracted to using distorted, sometimes I would say even harsh kind of sounds, like in your face kind of sound.
Yeah.
But Bring the Suspect is also very danceable at the same time. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's one of your more rhythmic pieces that we'll be listening to today. What is your attraction to distorted sound? I mean, you're a guitar player, right?
Yeah. First and foremost.
Yeah.
I suppose to some extent it's a lot of the music that I've known for a long time. Things like Einstürzen und Neubauten and early Cabaret Voltaire, and I've known a lot of that stuff for more than 35 years now. So I suppose it's from relatively early days of listening to music. There's been that kind of there's been an element of noise there. Not in everything I listen to.
Are there some punk rock roots in that then for you?
Well, the age that I am, I just kind of missed punk. So for me, it was, yeah. It was more like the two-tone ska kind of stuff.
I see.
And post-punk kind of things, really, when I was, getting to 10, 11, something like that. And as far as you can appreciate things at that age, it's a different kind of level.
Right. But just I have to say that Neubauten and Cabaret Voltaire and a couple other groups that came about at the end of the 70s, I don't think that they would have survived or thrived or even been born without punk.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It was very much a DIY sort of thing, but just a different approach to it. So I do think that spirit fuels that music as well, even though the delivery is different.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And it opened up a different point of access, really, where people could go in and do that. And I think as well, something that occurred to me in terms of the electronic music that I listen to, which is a pretty broad church as it is, but say back in the 90s when, some of the big electronic acts like Underworld and Orbital and so on, I love their stuff, but I suppose at the time, it's got these really high production values, certainly to my ear, which is great, but then I heard things like, I don't know if you're aware of Shitsuo?
No.
He was on he was on the Digital Hardcore Recordings label, and so it was very noisy, very trashy, very playful, and it was kind of mutant junglist kind of stuff. And listening to that, which it was very raw and very immediate, it was the kind of catalyst for making me think, well, that sounds like something I could at least try. So I suppose I associate the noise, the slightly trashier aesthetic, with things which are within my grasp.
Nice. Yeah, so, I don't want to harp too long on the influence of punk, but it's kind of like, punk was a giant middle finger at harmony, right? At harmonious music, right?
At prog rock that I like, actually.
Yeah.
But I like punk too, it's all right.
And when I was playing in the late 70s in Utrecht, the Netherlands, the punk scene was very alive, and it was just a really cool energy. It was kind of like this anti-authoritarian time, like question authority, and I think punk was the ultimate music expression of that. So I do recognize some of those elements in your music.
Yeah.
But then again, you do seem to think very, very deeply compositionally. You don't just throw things together and just create a wall of noise or, like a sequence of noises.
No.
You seem to almost develop a noise narrative, if you will.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I suppose coming back to what Jeff said about the balance between opposing elements, I kind of feel if I ever veer more exclusively to melody and structure and so on, then I kind of get itchy and I want to introduce some noise. So it's always that kind of oscillation between the two extremes.
And one thing I noticed about, especially in this track, but it's in your other tracks too, Pete, is that sometimes I don't know what I'm listening to. I don't know what instruments are making the noises I'm hearing and the sounds and whatever else is part of it. And I think that's good too. I think that is neat because it always makes it engaging. Everybody loves the sound of a guitar, but if you can play a guitar part and make it sound like something other than a guitar, that adds a texture that makes the track sparkle or whatever your intention is, I think that's always really, really engaging, and that's what I really love about this track too.
And I think one reason something I was very aware of when I chose this track anyway was that it went through so many processes that I've actually forgotten a lot of what the noises are or where they came from.
Great.
That happens to me too. Yeah, I do that too. Yeah.
So it's kind of looking through it, and I could go back to the original, arrangement on the on my music laptop and kind of work out, track back detective style where things came from. But I enjoy the fact that I don't know anymore, and there's that kind of objective distance in a lot of respects.
Yeah. It's so hard for us to be objective about our own art.
Of course,
a lot of times. So, so we hold on to that.
Yeah, sorry. Do you do any field recording? Do you any sounds that that you find and you say, hey, that's something?
Yes, I do. I haven't done it for a while, but I used to spend a lot of time, just taking the digital audio recorder and going wandering around, whether in the countryside or just wherever, like industrial sites where I could get lots of, metal clanging sounds and so on. There is one of a sort in Bring the Suspect, which is, and I think you mentioned it, Jeff, in the email about what sounds like a voice coming in halfway through. And that is a friend of mine called Simon, who I got to ring me up and sing some notes down the phone while he was pressing the buttons on the keypad. So that's
that's very cool.
Yeah. He's a long time, up until a few years ago, musical collaborator. We had this band called T-Tel. We loved the name T-Tel, and we used to get together and just record spontaneously or via the internet. But I've got a whole bank of things that I've got him to do. Ring me up and come out with absurd messages, or like on this track, and it's a case of, it's like you've got these things in the back of your mind, and I seem to think, as far as I can actually remember, that at that point in the track where I was there thinking, well, where's this going to go? And I think something suggested that, particular recording of him. So it's like, let's stick it in there, see if it works, see if we can do anything with it. And in this case, it seeed to work pretty well.
It's very nice. Yeah.
I was just curious about your beats, especially with this track, Bring the Suspect. They're very intricate. They're very intricate, I think, and especially, I'm not a very good rhythm composer myself, so I'm always very impressed by this stuff. And some of them seem sliced, some of them seem a little glitched.
Yeah.
How do you go about creating your percussion sounds and using those?
I was trying to think about that, and I'm not sure where the percussion sounds originate on this track, but they may actually be from another track on the album, and then I kind of imported them, because when I was working on this particular album, the way I was working, all the tracks felt pretty kind of separate and disparate. And what I did as one way of trying to find some, way of stitching them together to an extent was to do a lot of cross-sampling. So I would lift elements from one track, slot it in another, and so I'm pretty sure... it's amazing that I can't remember, but the drum track, the basic drum sounds on this were from a different track, and whereas they'd already probably been pitch shifted and some other texture and so on put on there, then when you start doing that kind of thing again, it makes it a bit sort of grainier, if you know what I mean.
Sure. Do you play your own drum machine parts for the percussion, or do you lift samples of kits from other places, or mixture of things?
A real mixture, and I'll process them as much or as little as whatever ends up serving the what's going on musically. So I seem to remember with a lot of the editing on this one that again, it went through so much processing, because it started out completely different, and what you've got is just these skeletal fragments of what was a whole chord sequence on guitar with an intricate guitar line over it, and then it kind of went the other way. So the guitar got sampled, pared down, and then the rhythm was the thing that really carried it. So, I mean, that's what I remember about the approach, really, and just playing with what was on the workstation. So, again, just thinking, okay, let's try a bit of ring modulation, let's try this, let's try that. And again, if it worked and if it, gave it some sort of forward momentum, then it would stay there.
So some percussion might not even have started as percussion at all. It could have been a slice of something else.
Potentially, yes. It's really difficult to say on this one.
That's okay. It's okay. I was just curious if you had a process that you followed regularly for percussion, or you just kind of grab whatever feels right at the time.
Yeah, the latter mainly. Yeah, and sometimes.
So what I'm hearing is like spontaneity is really an essential element of what you do, and in the spontaneity of the moment of creation, you do all these things, but then they become hard to trace, right?
Yeah. Spontaneity and happy accidents. A lot of what happens is, and this is something I seem to do a lot, if I'm looping a certain section of a track, whether it's for 8 bars or 16 bars or whatever, Most of the time I seem to loop it wrongly, so then it becomes 15 bars or 17 bars. Just reach a point, you know, if I'm in the middle of the process where I'll keep it at that, and I'll, you know, whether it's guitar or keyboard or whatever, I'll keep it where there are things which are not quite working together. If it sounds, you know, if it makes me laugh or just makes me think, actually, there's something going on there, then I'll keep it.
Yeah,
you know.
nice.
Yeah.
And I think that happened with the start of Bring the Suspect until it, you know, did get really heavily processed.
Right. This track has, in the second half, more obviously than in the first half, because the first half is very beat-oriented, and then the second half becomes more melodically oriented. And the melody is suggested, or the chord changes are suggested by a bass line, not so much by actual chords, but they, you know, because of the fullness of the sound, they almost feel like chordal changes. And they are, but they are not like, you know, you modulate, you change keys. Do you do that purposely, or is that, again, is this an element of your spontaneity as you're recording things?
Yeah, mostly the latter. And what happens a lot as well, I've got, you know, the original Casio sampling keyboard, which was kind of a toy, the SK1.
I have one of those.
Yeah, and I've still got it and still use it. So I think the bass line and some of the lead lines in the second part are actually what I just resampled from the guitar parts through the SK1.
Nice. Yeah.
And then because, you know, you've got a little cluster of notes which you've sampled at random, then, you know, pressing the one key and pressing another key, the note clusters kind of do something which I wouldn't have even thought of doing, you know, and so that the process led me as opposed to the other way around, because it's like, okay, so then I start playing notes which wouldn't be in my normal repertoire of notes, you know, and then that led on to the last part of it as well.
I have to say, to lovely effect, because, you know, I mean, you know, Jeff and I both have a jazz background, and you know, key modulation is used extensively, sometimes from chord to chord, and you know, it just makes me drool. Key modulations. But what you know, like I said before, what's really interesting is that you're not playing actual chords, but that the bass line suggests a chord. And that's just a really cool idea that I've never really thought about. You know?
Yeah, and if I thought about it in those terms, it wouldn't have happened, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, right.
It's not a contrivance, and that's the thing. It's kind of a long process of stumbling across things, you know, and like, oh, what's this? Okay, let's go with it. And obviously, it doesn't always work, but when it does work, there's a real sense of satisfaction, because it's, you know, it's like walking into something backwards.
Well, I have walked into things backwards.
Yeah. So Pete, the album that this is from, Bring the Suspect, is the from Saxon Aristocracy is Governing the World with Radar.
That's easy for you to say.
And it's a nice title. Obviously, as we mentioned before, released on Dave Lavery's Romita Records. How did you get involved with Romita?
That was through Steve, a.k.a. Albinos of Northfield. Because I think Steve mentioned that, you know, we've known each other for quite some time through, you know, going to gigs of whichever obscure bands in Birmingham, and, you know, just catching up and chatting from time to time. And so he was going to be bringing out a single on Romita, Cinnamon Fog. And I'd not actually done any music for a while because of circumstances relating to what was happening. You know, I'd got no time to myself to do anything for a good while due to circumstances. But at the time when he contacted me, I was in a different place where I'd actually got a lot of time, but I'd just not, you know, got back into the headspace of doing music. And then he just sent me this request, you know, via whichever social media, saying, I've got this track which is going to be released. Do you want to do a remix of it? And it took me a split second to reply, you know, and to say yes. But in that split second, I was there thinking, right, okay, so this is going to mean deadlines, it's going to mean commitment to doing this, that and the other, and I've got to think about all this kind of stuff again. But straight away it was just yes, So I did the remix for him, and interestingly, and this was how brilliantly Dave worked, Dave Lavery, there was no deadline which was imposed on me, so it was all just pressure that I was putting on myself to get it finished by a certain point. But Steve and Dave responded really positively to it. I'd sent it them as a work in progress and said, well, here's where I'm at with it, and they both were really, really complimentary and said, yeah, this is great, we're going to use this. And so sometime after that I got a nice message from Dave, full of thanks for that, and then he said, if you ever want to do any recording for us, just let us know. And this was the brilliant thing he said, but not just yet, because I'm really busy. And I thought, actually, that's brilliant, because that means I can get into things again with no deadlines, no rush. Right. So, I just started to think.
It went from there. Yeah. In fact, I think that's the first time we heard about you. It was through Dave.
Yeah.
Because he had just released Cinnamon Fog.
That's right.
Do you remember that case? I think it wasn't too much before we spoke to him. Back in 2000,
it was one of the first
15,
things that was put out on Ramadan. Was Albinos, I believe, was one of the first ones, and then one of Dave's, one of Litchfield, right? And then at some point you followed with your own. You have two main albums, right? And one album has a companion EP.
That's right. Yeah, Creosote Night.
Yeah. So what was sort of the decision process to come out with a companion EP? That's kind of an unusual circumstance, I would say.
Yeah, and I'd kind of forgotten about that, because in initial emails with Dave, he'd said, here's the plan, do you want to do an album or do you want to do an EP? And I think at that point an album seemed quite daunting, so I probably said, well, I'll do an EP. And then I just kept working and sending him things. And I think because the first run of vinyl releases that he did, he'd just got this idea that we'd have this consistent format of the vinyl LP with the downloads and whatever, and a companion CD. So when I finally got into the headspace that actually this is going to be an album and I've got enough material for it, and then he started talking about, don't forget about the EP as well. And I was like, right, okay, more stuff to do, which was great anyway, But that was from Dave, and I was happy to go along with that because I've never, done a full album release or anything like that before. Then it was actually easier to have Dave effectively curating it, because we got to a certain point where I'd just be emailing him tracks every so often, and then finally he got back to me and said, right, here's a running order. What do you think about this? And so to listen back on somebody else's suggestion was brilliant, because again it gave me a little bit of objectivity to think, actually this might work. It would have been a different thing if I'd chosen the order at that stage. So it was really, really helpful, and it just got this really kind of subtle guidance about things, just to get things, moving along, but without any pressure, and it was a brilliant way of working.
He's very clever.
Yes.
Dave Lavery. Yeah?
He knows how to work with people really well.
He does, and what's a testament to that? Two artists on Ramada who've done a lot of releases for Dave on Ramada are Martin and Gordon, and Dublock.
Yes.
And Gordon and Martin both had their own labels.
Yes.
And you know what? They chose to release on Dave's label.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a testament to Dave, I think.
Definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about, let's go back in time and let's talk a little bit. How did you get into music? Do you have any formal training? When did you pick up a guitar? Why did you do that?
No formal training. My dad, he had a guitar. I've got a wonderful photograph of him. He was in a skiffle band, presumably late 50s, early 60s. And I don't know much about them, but he'd got this guitar, which I think had just been left gathering dust for years. And I don't know what age I would have been, whether it's 4 or 5 or something like that. But I used to pick up this guitar, and I mean, I didn't know even how to press the strings down to make a note or anything like that. But I'd just kind of make sounds on the strings and stick my ear next to the sound box and hear these kind of, what for me were these spacey, scary noises, from all the reverb and so on in the sound box. So maybe there was some, just interest there in making sound anyway. My parents saw this interest and bought me a little nylon string guitar. And, I learnt chords and so on, but then I think for whatever reason I lost interest for a while until I was maybe 13, 14, and my brother came back from college with an electric guitar, and then suddenly it was like, right, okay, this is a different level now, and that reignited my dad's interest in the guitar as well. So, yeah, it was just a thing of, again, for me, like I say, no formal training, which it was always, playing by ear, really, putting on whichever records I loved and just trying to work out the chords, which has got its limitations, but also, I don't know any different, really, You
develop a good ear doing that.
Yeah.
You definitely. Yeah. What were some of those records?
Going back to, when I very first picked up my dad's guitar and so on, thinking about his records, it was like a lot of jazz and blues and the Rolling Stones. Both parents were Rolling Stones fans. So there was that. And then when I was kind of, in my early teens, I was never going to listen to any of that. But I came back to it a few years later. But I went through a bit of a mod phase when, I was 13, 14, so Small Faces, Kinks, that kind of thing. But again, this was more or less in parallel with my brother bringing albums back from college, like Einstürzen de Neubauten and Cabaret Voltaire, and then there were things like The and the early 4AD stuff like Cocteau Twins and whatever else. So there was a real mixture, and I think what it did was just mean that my ears were open. When I first heard Einstürzen de Neubauten, it was the scariest thing I'd ever heard. This was their really early kind of harsh, abrasive stuff. And at the time, I can remember just my response was absolute scorn, like, somebody's paid money for this, But there was something which drew me back to it, and I had to keep coming back and there was actually some trepidation with, putting the needle on the record, because I knew it was going to be this really harsh, noisy thing. But I imagined it was like teenagers in the 1950s getting a Jerry Lee Lewis record, and the parents saying, this is not music, this is noise, and so on. And I think it had that really visceral kind of effect on me, So, yeah, there was a lot of that. And at the time, I used to love Depeche Mode, their early stuff, loads of different things, really. It's you can't come out with some kind of definitive list because there's so many.
So I'd like to switch our conversation to Pennies for the Boatman, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure.
And one of the reasons for that is that it has an interesting rhythmic emphasis. Like techno has emphasis on every beat, right? The rhythm is almost indistinguishable. It just goes on and on and on. Most pop music is on 2 and 4 count, but this track is on the emphasis is on the 1 and 3 count, and it makes for it's kind of an unusual feel to it. It drives differently, and because our minds are so conditioned, including my own, to want that beat on the 2 and the 4, right? Because it's on the 2 and the 4 is also good for dancing. It helps really, drive movement. Yeah. And this goes right against that. And so in the beginning, it's like a little bit of a lo-fi techno feel, but then the 1-3 beat becomes more dominant in that. Can you talk a little bit about what were you trying to accomplish with that? Or, I'm afraid you're going to say it's part of the spontaneity, but...
Yes. Again, there was no plan as such. I was trying to get a feel for it, which I think again I've mentioned Cabaret Voltaire a few times, but they're really difficult for me to escape. And there's something of them in not every track that I've done, but certainly a majority, I'm sure. And so I was trying to, for me, it's interesting that you pick up on the rhythmic aspect, and obviously it's there, and it's almost a martial kind of thing. But it wasn't going anywhere until I got the right kind of texture, really. And again, that was through a lot of sampling and resampling using the SK1, which again gives it that lo-fi kind of thing, because it reduces it pretty much to 8-bit.
Yeah.
But I'd got maybe 2 or 4 bars of it, of the basic structure. And I was trying different things, and for a good while it sounded exactly like a Cabaret Voltaire track. And I was thinking, this sounds great, but it's not my track, so I've got to do something different with it. So maybe in the kind of stripping that away and rebuilding it again, that thing happened rhythmically. But given that it's not the longest track on the album, but it's the second longest. But given that I think for 3 or 4 months it lasted a few seconds. But I think certainly from my perspective, when things started to happen properly in terms of texture and atmosphere, and probably how that sat with the rhythm, then the remaining few minutes of it came really quickly, because it was like, right, I've got a way forward now. Here we go, full steam ahead.
But you use a variety of layers of rhythm, right? You use rhythm from a percussive point of view, and I think there you sort of like to draw the listener into a different space, but you also use rhythm in the way you compose, because think of some of your music from a collage kind of perspective, but the elements you use, you compose those also rhythmically. They occur, right? And so your music is not like intro, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus, outro, but you do have all these elements, and you compose them almost rhythmically, the different elements. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Kind of, yeah. It certainly does for this track. The variations, as much as anything, are in, what's happening rhythmically. Little things like the hi-hat becomes, on whatever program I'm using, it goes from hi-hat to open hi-hat or whatever. So you get these little textural things which hopefully push it along and so on. But also, in terms of rhythmically as well, less the percussion side of it on there, but there's a bass line on there which I would literally control and V, into the track as it was playing live, because then there's this one note bass line which sometimes happens randomly across the rhythm. Sometimes it's on it, sometimes it's slightly off. And again, it was that kind of thing which hopefully meant that it wasn't just stuck to this, if it is 1-3, I'm showing my ignorance here about 1-3 and that kind of thing, but just ways of pushing it and kind of prodding it, to see what it would do, adding a little bit of rhythmic tension and so on. I think for me the thing is the tension. If that's there, then you can have the same basic rhythm and basic things going on, as long as there are these little events or incidents which make it do something else.
Interesting.
And it's funny you mentioned techno, Kees, because I thought of that, and I wrote some notes down as I was listening. And while it's not techno, Pennies for the Boatman does have breaks.
Yes.
Sure.
You know, that kind of breakdown, and it builds up,
absolutely,
crescendos and then breaks, like techno does. And one of the things that I thought about this track, and I think you just pretty much explained it with your intention, is the groove in the track seems to be very comforting. It seems familiar, like okay, all right, I feel at home, I feel settled, and then the sounds will come in, and that will just say something of risk, to you. And there's that dichotomy.
Yes, exactly
again. That spontaneity versus planning versus thought. That I couldn't help but think that the beginning percussion sounded like coins hitting a metal coffer, and Pennies for the Boatman, thinking of Charon, the ferryman,
It's interesting that you got that association with the coins, because that's, although when I think of Pennies for the Boatman, my track, I've got this kind of spatial imagery with it, but certainly nothing that for me would have brought about that direct association, so I think it's really interesting that these kind of things come up. But and again, the dichotomous thing for me, I think, and this has been true with a lot of visual art that I've done, and I think it probably relates to some extent to the photography again, but I think it's the tension between the frame and things which are free-flowing. So, like in this case, the frame is, you know, the beats and that kind of structure, and then what's happening across that.
Right.
So, you know, again, that oppositional thing.
Yeah, and they're both important in the overall effect. It's funny, I was talking to somebody recently about this, and I see this in your music too, Pete. I really do. I was talking about some of my favorite music is music that you're not supposed to see or hear anything in it. There's no point to it. You know, there's no point to it. When you hear a pop song, it's evident that somebody who wrote it and performed it wants you to feel a certain way and wants. It has to be about something, right? Like when you're a kid and you first start drawing, you're drawing things that are familiar to you, and you want somebody to look at it and say, "Oh yeah, I can tell that's a house and that's the sun and that's the sky," right? You start with something familiar, but as you go on and you get into more abstract feel, blah blah blah. You don't have to draw anything. You can draw a circle, and it can be whatever you want. It can be whatever the person sees in it, and that's, you know, an element in some of my favorite music. Especially, I hear it in electronic and experimental music, and I hear it in yours too. You aren't telling me what I'm looking at or what I'm listening to. You know, it's just what I find it. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It doesn't matter. And I don't think it matters to you either that I see something that you didn't intend that's not there, because it's so wide open that it can be anything you want. And that's the beauty
There's
of it.
something there about, and I think this is true for me in terms of use of words. Obviously not in most of my music because it's mostly instrumental, but in terms of words in a general sense, the notion of suggesting more than you actually state, you know, so that you give a pointer and then the person receiving that information, you know, it's up to them, really. And I think, you know, if that's your intention, that's absolutely fine. If you're trying to say something specific and somebody doesn't get it, then you've got a different set of problems. But I think just putting something there, again, like I said earlier, kind of prodding or poking or something, just having that bit of making somebody notice, you know, if that makes any kind of sense.
Well, you know, there are two ways to make music. Is right. One is to, you know, to express yourself just for yourself, and the other one is to have an audience for it. And I think, think, Pete, what I hear you say is when you're in the creative process, you don't really have an audience in mind. You're just enjoying the process. And it is maybe an afterthought that this might be of interest to an audience. I very much share that. I don't create my music with the idea, I'm going to make an album, or, you know, it just happens, and I enjoy it tremendously. And if it ever gets listened to by somebody else or not, it does not really matter. But then when you take your music and you do put it out there, you know, you for example, you know, you have very interesting titles that, you know, are sometimes a little obscure if you don't know what's underneath it, and the music doesn't reveal much towards the title either. So, you know, let's listen to Pennies for Boatman, for the Boatman, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about titling and the idea of audience. You know, once you get to the decision, like, I want to put my music out there, then how does it change you viewing your own music, you know, and the process behind it?
Yeah. So we're speaking with Pete Prescription, and we are talking about his track Pennies for the Boatman, and we're going to listen to that now. That's from his album On Tea Rooms of Occult, Nomenclature. Interesting title there. Excellent. So Pennies for the Boatman here on Eclectrocasts.
ended sort of, at the idea of titling. And to me, it feels like your titles are almost like paint strokes. And in fact, I think of a lot of your music as like it has some sort of a visual aspect to it. And I think the titles that you choose, I mean, Jeff responded to Pennies for the Boatman, and it sort of put a little bug in his ear, and he heard coins,
Yeah.
Now, you're also a photographer, aren't you?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the role of visualization and either in the creative process or, how does visualization, photography, and music, how does that interplay with each other for you?
Probably via drawing and painting. I mean, I know we're not including any of my drawing and painting in this.
We aren't?
No. Well, the reason for that, I mean, the photography at the moment is something which is, I've gotten more involved in again lately. Whereas I'd reached not a dead end with visual art, but I've got so bogged down and so aware of process that, I felt better just leaving it to one side, really.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, obviously drawing and painting has got the visual element in common with photography. And I suppose I see the music I often see it in terms of starting on a blank page with a line and seeing where the line goes. I've been trying to think about what relationship the photography has got with the music, but I certainly think in terms of the kind of space which has got resonance, and the kind of atmosphere which has got resonance. And I often use the word resonance, and it can feel like a bit of a cop-out. It's like a shorthand for something which I can't really describe. Right. But it's like the titles themselves. I mean, the song titles often come from if I've misheard a conversation in passing, or if I see something, whether it's on a billboard or somewhere else, but something gets suggested which stays with me, and I think, that's maybe a title, so I'll jot it down. And I think that immediate response to visual things, in terms of space and in terms of what's going on structurally within that space, little pointers and so on, the one that you've used on the tweet with just the lights. And it's not obvious necessarily what those lights are, but it's the interplay of colours and so on. And that for me was enough, really. And I think I'm probably in the end trying to evoke similar things, but through different means, with the music and with the photography. Right. But again, it's probably difficult to try and actually put that into words, and the circular logic there is that's why I do the music and the photography. Right. Which feels like another cop-out, because I think it's good to be able to explain these things. But
it addresses another dimension of creativity for you that you do not necessarily find in creating music.
Yeah. And I think it's a bit like, the Gary Larson cartoons. If you saw one on its own, and you might think, oh yeah, that's funny, that's, or it's a bit off kilter or whatever. But the more you see of them, the more it reinforces Gary Larson's humour and what he's trying to put across. So I think for me, photography in series, which again comes back to what I was talking about with grids, it's one thing after another and so on. I think there's that kind of mutually reinforcing thing, which hopefully, if you've heard a couple of pieces of my music, and then it might work better in the context of an album and with other tracks either side of them.
Yeah, so photography that I've seen from you, and I think you're a Flickr site, but you really have to build that up, right? Your Flickr site. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Is that in your photography, you seem to be very attracted to how things are composed naturally in front of you, how they are, right? And you try to frame out a piece of that is of interest to you. So, but but your music has a lot more elements of distortion and surprise in it. But that's not so apparent your photography is more concrete, less abstract. And I think your photography almost like reveals like your eye for beauty in everyday things. Yeah.
Yeah. I think with the photography, it's responding to something, which is not to say it's not creative in itself, but it's something that's pre-existing, and it's about my relationship with that thing, I suppose, and what catches your eye, and what you select from what's already there. And you can manipulate it in all sorts of different ways. But with the music, that's coming from a different source in that you're creating effectively from scratch. Obviously it's within a context of all sorts of things, but I think with the music, it's got that different direction because, this stuff is coming from me, with all the things about influences and so on. But it's a different facet, or it's a different aspect, whereas, like I say, the photography, it's filtering stuff which is out there. So that might be because I've got less control over what's out there, so it's just about selection.
Yeah. So one of my Twitter friends is a photographer, and he lives in Providence. I've met him actually. His name is Eric Gould, and he just shared on Twitter an interesting interview that was done with him, and he said, and there was one quote in there that really struck me that sort of also strikes a chord with what you're saying, is that when he is in a particular space, outside or wherever, he spends a lot of time in there, and then to him the photo is not necessarily about the space; it's about his experience of the space. And that that may sound like a trite observation, but I think it's deeply essential difference between photography and music, right? Because music, you're almost creating a space, right? You're creating an experience. You're not putting yourself in the experience and then make a recording to hold on to how you remember.
Kind of.
That.
It could go both ways, though, Kees. I'm thinking of remixes, right? So you guys have both done remixes. I've done remixes. Kees, in fact, you had an album of remixes of Fantastic Plastique, where you gave everybody a certain group of sounds, and everybody pulled what they saw what they wanted to out of that and created something. So in that way, it's similar to what you're talking about. But I don't think what you said is trite, and I don't think what you said he said is trite.
No,
because if you take 100 photographers and put them in the same space, they're going to have their own stamp on every single photograph.
Well, they're going to have,
and they're all going
to have their own experience, and therefore their photographs will be uniquely different. Yeah, but that was an eye-opening phrase for me. My wife has done a lot of photography in the past and did photo restoration, and I had never really gone that route in thinking about photographers in that way. So. Anyway, sorry for my long-winded, long-winded thought here, but these are interesting things about the medium. Kind of leads you to explore other parts of yourself. So earlier we started talking a little bit about the sense of audience, and I don't really want to lose that. What changes for you?
Yeah.
How do you listen differently to your own music once you make the step of releasing it to an audience or preparing to release it to an audience? What changes for you?
For me, I think one of the ways that became apparent was when, we've mentioned Martin Canal-Dry, who did the mastering on both of, all of my releases on Romida. When it had gone through the mastering process, that gave me a sense of listening to it slightly differently, slightly more objectively, because it had, gone through another process at the hands of somebody else. And so I was kind of listening differently anyway. And so I think that gave some sense of objectivity. But I think really the main thing for me is, we were talking about Bring the Suspect earlier, and the fact that it's hard for me to remember some of the processes. Then it is actually the passing of time. And especially when I've done different music since. Then when you come back to something which is complete and done and dusted and seems kind of hermetically sealed, then it's easier to forget all the nuts and bolts and things which, you know, were all part of the making of it. I think you, to some extent, shed some elements of that process, and then it can just actually be easier to hear what you've done as opposed to at the same time hearing how you did it, you know, because for me that takes away a lot of the objectivity. So, you know, thinking about, say, Bring the Suspect, and I've still got memories of, you know, working on the guitar line and all the changes that it went through, but they're vague enough now that I can hear the, you know, just the results mainly.
Right. So, let's talk a little bit about I Cholesterol. I hope I say it right.
Absolutely.
I Cholesterol. It's a track that we'll listen to in a little while. You know, it's like as a listener, you demand a lot from me.
Right.
So, because there's so much happening in that track, you know, it's very a lot of industrial sounds, a very upbeat guitar riff, you know, heavily distorted parts, like really harsh distortion. And just as I get used to something, you go completely different. You know, this song just takes turns and twists like the whole time through. There is no relaxation in it. So it puts a very high demand on the listener. So that's sort of where my question kind of came from, is that you don't shy away from saying, oh, this is going to be a lot of work for people to listen to. It is work. You know, it's not a track that I could just sit and let it wash over me. Right? I have to be engaged. So so how do you decide to put that out? Because it's kind of risky, right, to do that?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that was the very first track that I sent to Dave at Romeda.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, well, if he gets this, if he's okay with this, then fine.
Yeah.
We're good. And his response was, I mean, I can remember, I think, emailing it to him or whatever, and then I went out on a long bike ride because I was thinking, what the hell is he going to think of this? You know, but like I say, I thought, well, if he gets this, then he's got where I'm at, basically.
Yeah.
So, and in terms of the twists and turns, I mean, I used the phrase earlier about, you know, drawing a line on a blank piece of paper and seeing where it goes, and often not knowing where it's going to go. You know, and there's that kind of thing.
But these are not smooth changes, right? They're all very abrupt.
No, absolutely.
Right? They're all very sharp, very acute.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And I actually thought earlier today that the title I Cholesterol, those two words don't really go together. No. You know.
I caramba.
But when yes, and when you've listened to the track, or, you know, whichever track with whichever title for any length of time, you know, however much it might jar first off, you kind of incorporate it and get used to it. So I think there's something there about wearing the listener down, you know. And again, that if you're going to accept all of these very disparate elements, then hopefully it kind of opens you up to all sorts of things, really. You know, it not necessarily changes the way you listen, but if you're going to get that track, then you're going to get a lot of other things besides, really.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, I once saw a concert in Poughkeepsie, in the Chancery Poughkeepsie, of Pat Metheny. Now, Pat Metheny, you know, is a very well-known jazz player from the United States. Yeah. And he said to the audience, I'm going to do something that will probably turn you off a little bit. He played a heavy metal track. And I was going insane. I was like, wanted to hug him because, you know, he didn't want to be pinholed. And he's kind of like, if you can't take this, then, you know, you can't take me. And I think you're saying that with I Cholesterol a little bit too. That's what I sort of hear from you. If you can't take this, you can't take me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of. And I think musically, a lot of the tracks that I've responded to are things which do have these twists and turns. You know, I mean, things like Mother of Pearl by Roxy Music. You know, it's set in one direction for the first couple of minutes and then suddenly goes into something else. And the first few times I heard that, I mean, it's still the case to a large degree, but, you know, just anticipating that moment and thinking, well, how on earth did this get here when it started? And I've got maybe a certain set of expectations. Tracks like that, you know, and Washing Machine by Sonic Youth, again, which starts out in a certain way and then breaks down, goes into something different. So I've always, you know, not every track like that, but tracks which do that and which work and do something for me. I think it's something that I really respond to, you know. So I think there's doing the equivalent of and putting out my version of that for other people. I mean, last night I was listening to Black Sabbath, you know, second album Paranoid, and they're very non-linear. You know, they'll start out and they've got this real, you know, heavy slab of a riff going on, and you could think, well, this is how it's going to be, and then halfway through, well, they've gone into a completely different tempo and set of chords and so on. You know. Yeah. War Pigs does that back and forth constantly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm thinking of, you know, the Beatles, thinking of Day in the Life. You know, that did that too, you know, because I guess you had, you know, a little piece of John's song, you had a little piece of Paul's song. Paul did it in Band on the Run too. It went through, you know, three different small sections before it settled into what it would become. It's almost like taking a journey. Yes. And Cardiacs. Interesting. You know Cardiacs? No. Who's right? Okay. Your homework is yes. I would suggest go and listen to Cardiacs. I mean, my favourite is Sing to God, which is a double album. But there's more things happen within the first, you know, 2 or 3 tracks than happen in, you know, a lot of albums and a lot of spans of albums, really. But it's not gratuitous. It can be a bit overwhelming, but it just works.
So I hope that everybody got a real sense of your, of your ability to grab the listener by the shirt and drag him to all kinds of unexpected places. And so let's stay with this listener focus for a minute. You talk a little bit about that when you get like a mastered version of your music back, you can sort of put yourself in listener ears. What do you hope people hear when they listen to your music? Or what do you hope they feel? What should they get out of it? How should it affect them?
That is a very challenging question.
What is your hope?
Actually, yeah.
For that?
I think it's probably a reflection of, when I hear a piece of music which grabs me in whatever way, that it's doing some sort of equivalent. So for me, a lot of music which, if you hear it and it's in the background or whatever, and you think, what the hell is that? And how on earth did somebody think of that? Like some really psychedelic kind of woozy stuff which might be going on, and you sort of think, where were they, to be able to produce that? And just there's something very intoxicating about that. And so if there was something, and like you said about the kind of the effort that it takes to listen to certain things, but if you stick with it and if the reward is there, and there's some kind of response, whether it's like, what the hell, or, I really didn't expect that, but wow, that's gone there. I suppose a reaction of some sort, at its most basic, is something anyway. The fact that somebody's responded in whatever way. But yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of the twists and turns are, they're certainly not for the sake of it, but they're about keeping it interesting for me. And I suppose I hope that would be the same for the listener, that it keeps things interesting.
So you don't, you're not intending to lull them into oblivion. You really want to, sort of confront them with themselves, through the music. I don't know if that makes sense.
We were talking about Pennies for the Boatman, and the fact that it's got alternating musical sections where there's just the noise on top and that kind of thing. I mean, I guess that could be seen as quite confrontational and so on. And if somebody gets it, that they get it. I don't think it's quite as absolute as that, because there's other things going on in there, and I think maybe somebody might listen despite the noise to an extent, but in the end the noise is so inseparable from it that they kind of take it on board in the end, so that there is maybe a bit of beating down into submission.
So this is like, this is just completely my interpretation, so you can ignore it, not go there, but my experience with you on Twitter is that you have a very healthy sense of humor, on the sharp side, on the almost on the sarcastic side,
almost.
And so I think you look at the world in a certain way, and sometimes you open the veil a little bit and you give us some insights. I have a sense that, like, your sense of humor, your sense of wanting to sort of give things a bit of a, the essence of humor is that you create an expectation, but then you go somewhere else, right? That's why it's funny. Yeah. And so I think this like I think everybody has sort of a desire to tickle other people, not literally tickle, but tickle their imagination, tickle their sense of humor, or tickle their emotions, right? So I feel like, you reveal a lot through your sense of humor about what you want with your music. Sure. Do you agree with that, or do you see that differently?
I kind of see that. I mean, certainly, hopefully the music has got playfulness in it, and humour in it without it necessarily being funny. It's like you can get a sensibility that there's humour there without it, being a resort to gags and so on. I mean, I'd certainly be happy with that kind of thing coming across. Yeah.
I mean, you know, so it's like humor or or art is a way of putting up a mirror to the world, isn't it? You know, look at yourself.
I was going to say, yeah, it's an element of a worldview, and I think, again, without getting into specifics, the state of how the world is at the moment anyway, then I think humour is certainly a way of processing it and getting through it, really. So, yeah. Right. And I think, you know, there's that very fine line between something which is expressed through humour and very serious stuff. So I sort of hope with the music that if people can hear, you know, the humorous elements in there, that they're actually not that far from, you know, the more serious things as well.
Oh, of course. You know, like the track we're going to write out on The Fair Hand of Decay, I mean, the title alone is it makes me laugh, you know. It's like, it's wry, isn't it? Like The Fair Hand of Decay, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean, I'm thinking of getting old, you know. It's like getting old is not pretty. It's a privilege, but it is certainly not a thing of beauty. But the word fair, the fair hand of decay, now it might also be a musical reference, you know, but I sort of take that as a mirror to look in. You know?
Sometimes you get what you deserve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really? No.
Yeah.
Is that? I mean, I can't say that everybody goes through they're deserving of either way, good or bad. But ultimately, I think, you know, how we treat the environment, how we treat our bodies, how we treat each other. I think a lot of times we end up getting what we deserve, and I think that's where that fairness comes in. You know, with whatever is decaying. Pete, you tell us what is decaying actually in that song, or what was your intent with that title anyway? Just what were you thinking?
Good question, because again this is going back a while, but I'm glad you picked up on the humour case, because it wasn't meant as a fully serious title, but obviously it's, you know, there's a certain darkness in the reference to Decay, but I didn't want that too heavy, because I mean, with the atmosphere in that track, you know, it's quite low. You know, I'm trying to think of a better way of describing it, but you know, with all the kind of the sound stage that's there, it's quite gloomy in a way. But what's happening with the vocals? I mean, you'd have to understand Polish. But the vocals are saying something completely different. So again, there's that tension, that oppositional thing. And I think I wanted the title to reflect that, so that it's serious, but it's not taking itself too seriously.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. I actually found that that track the most soothing of the four tracks that we're listening. You know, while you can certainly hear gloomy elements, sort of the minor feel. There's also sort of like you're on a gentle wave, you know, like you're sort of being carried along very gently.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you selected this to share with us, because I think from the three tracks that we've listened to so far, you know, people might get the impression that it is all high energy stuff, but you can also do very subtle work, and I think this, you know, The Fair Hand of Decay is a very good example of that. It is actually personally my favorite track of the four that we're listening to today, but that's just my taste, you know, and in terms of music, because I think it's slowly developing. And it has more of a story feel to it, you know. It gives me a little bit more time to imagine things as I'm listening.
Yeah.
So before we ride out, talk to us. Where are you going next with your music? What's next? What can we expect?
Good question. I mean, I could say nothing for a while. I'm incredibly busy with other things at the moment, so I don't think it's been a bad thing to take a bit of a hiatus, but at the same time I still want and need to carry on, you know, with the process of recording stuff and eventually releasing it. But I've been thinking lately that because I'm so busy with other things, it might be that forces a change in the way I approach things, and I might have to do something which has got, a lot more spontaneity. That's really kind of the way that it would go. So some very quick things which, whether they might be around a certain theme or something like that, but certainly a difference in approach for the time being, so that I can still be productive to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Any interest in using more vocal elements? Because that's pretty sparse in your record so far, but there are some, like as in this track.
Yeah.
I found it very attractive in this track. Very good use of vocal whispering, I would say.
And that's my friend Caroline as well. And she was brilliant, because I just asked her, look, can you talk about something really mundane, but whisper it and do it in Polish for about 3 or 4 minutes? And she said, yeah, okay. And then she sent me the file through. So, and it was perfect. But yeah, I do like the idea of bringing in other elements. I think it's nice to get that kind of thing if a lot of your music is instrumental. Again, to bring different things in, which it certainly made me think about that track differently, because from early on I just thought, well, yeah, I want something to happen with this vocally, and I wasn't sure what, but it takes it to a different dimension, really. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I did an interesting project with Lucia Phoenix from Chile. And it was like, it made me think very differently about my music, because a vocal element in there, you need to think about it. Where do you place that in the track? That was a big, steep learning curve for me.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Or looking at it the other way, where do you place yourself in relation to the vocals?
Right. And what is the function,
Yeah, so sitting back and allowing the vocal space and so on can completely change the way that you play, or that you approach composition and so on.
Well, Jeff, you've done some things with spoken word, right? Recently, over the past year or two or so.
No, there was some spoken word on the Nail album, and then there was a track on Silence the Second Voice, but I did a vocal track 2 years ago for the end of Fwonk. It was the first time I'd sung on any of my recordings. It may be the last. But, I like recitation. I do. Some of my favorite indie bands have done recitation for certain things. Bands like Piano Magic and Epic 45, and of course Godspeed You Black Emperor. They do all sorts of cool things like that. And I enjoy that sort of thing, but I don't know. I wouldn't want to do it again unless I did something different with it. So I don't know if I'm going to be doing that again.
Well, it can be a lot easier to get somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
Because again, in terms of being objective about it, you're going to think about somebody else's vocals differently than your own, really.
I totally agree. I tend to want to bury my own vocals. I used to sing in a band. Well, singing is not the right word, but I used to scream out the words. And so Pete, this has been a lot of fun, man, and so nice to meet you in person.
Likewise,
you really got me thinking today about the role of spontaneity in the creation of music.
Okay.
I think that was a big theme of what we talked about, and I hope other people can relate to that. Not everybody can do that. It takes a bit of guts. It takes a lot of trust in yourself to go with that. And in the process, and not everybody is like that. It's not for everybody, but it is definitely for you. And so
I think it's a bit like this has just come to mind, swinging from one vine leaf to the next. And there's that point in the middle where it's like, well, can I keep hold of this and go on to the next part?
No, it is. It is.
Yeah. So thank you so much. It was a great pleasure.
And thank you.
And,
likewise.
Yeah. We're going to write out on the Fair Hand of Decay.
Fair Hand
of
Decay. Yes. Thanks for everybody for spending the time listening. Thank you, Pete, for spending the time talking and in your insight.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for 2 albums and an EP of great music, and we hope you go in to do some great things in the future. I know you will. And we're going to ride out on the track, The Fair Hand of Decay. This is the last track from Pete's On Tea Rooms of Occult Nomenclature album. Last year or 2017? Last year. I thought it was
2018.
Yeah, 2018, yeah. Great release. I've been enjoying that one for months. But and I hope you will too. So check this out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support, everybody. Fair Hand of Decay. Take care.